Hi, good afternoon. This is Maggie Bush. I'm the Programs and Outreach Director at the League of Women Voters U.S. office. Thanks for joining us today for a conversation about getting the most out of our voter registration efforts this year. I'm also going to introduce my two colleagues on the phone, Alicia Guerrieri and Jess Vocaturo, who are organizers here at the national office and have been supporting lots and lots of state and local leagues on voter registration work this year. Jess and Alicia and I, throughout the hour here, will be sharing some best practices about voter registration, answering questions that you may enter into the chat box or the question box. We're going to save some time for questions at the end. Just to go over a few other quick housekeeping items. As you may have heard when you dialed in, everybody is muted on their phones just to keep everybody able to hear things clearly. We will have time for questions at the end, and again, as I said, you can absolutely always type in a question that we'll either try to answer for you right then and there or take at the end. We also will be sharing out a recording of this webinar in this week's League update, and also we'll send a follow-up email including some of these materials, including the PowerPoint, after today's session. And we will try to keep things to an hour or less. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. As I said, today we're going to talk about sort of the lay of the land with voter registration, talk about some of the demographics that are driving our priorities as an organization when it comes to voter registration activities that we here out of the national office are prioritizing and that many, many of you as League volunteers are doing. We're going to go over some voter registration best practices, and those are really driven from feedback we've received from leagues throughout the last decade or so about what's really working for us as an organization when it comes to voter registration. What do we really need to do some more of? Where do League volunteers need the most assistance from the national office, and so forth. We're going to talk about some easy, great tactics to help build your league through voter service work like voter registration. Many of you have told us that you're in the good situation of having lots of interest in your voter registration work this year. You're receiving tons of requests from partners and businesses and organizations in your community to come do voter registration at their venues. You're also seeing lots of great volunteer excitement about voter registration. So we want to talk through some ways to help make the most of that fact and really build our organization so we're strong in 2020 and strong beyond. And to that end, of course, we'll talk about some of the resources we here at the League, at the national office, have to offer. And again, we'll share those out in an email to you following today's webinar. So we're going to launch a poll. We want to get a sense of who's on the phone here. So we're going to ask you a question that you should see pop up on your screen in just a minute about how experienced are you with voter registration? And there's a few options there. So Alicia, have most folks voted?
Yep, most folks have voted, and it looks like that we have a whole range of people represented on this call. We have some people who have no experience at all doing voter registration, and the 35% on the call have participated just in some events, and then we have about a quarter folks who have participated in many of voter registration events, but and then another 24% who are experts at this. So we should be hearing a lot of good questions and tips from folks throughout.
Okay, so I'm thrilled to see that, to hear that almost 1 in 5 of our attendees so far on the phone, even as more people are calling in right now, have really never done this before. And then a full quarter of you are leading this in your league. So we have a wide range of expertise. Thanks, Alicia, as she just told us from your results. And our goal is that everybody will learn at least something helpful coming out of today's training. So we're going to move along and talk about sort of where we're at in terms of our voter registration success. We have been driving really powerful campaigns to serve voters and build the league for some time now. Those of you at the U.S. convention back in June heard a lot about this from our new national leadership and other staff members that you may have interacted with and national board members. We know, for example, that this year in 2018, we will serve millions of voters online and in person. Our online traffic to vote411.org, which many of you may be familiar with, has already surpassed the traffic that we had in 2016, which was a presidential year, of course, and we're not even anywhere close to Election Day yet. So we are just growing in terms of the number of people we are serving. That includes tens of thousands of people who are getting registered to vote on vote411.org, and of course, finding other election-related information about both their primaries and the general election coming up in November. We know that you have huge goals in terms of the voter registration activities you're carrying out locally. So leagues told us that they were planning to visit at a minimum about 500 high schools. It's probably far more than that to register voters. We know that leagues are registering voters in at least 600 citizenship ceremonies across the country this year. And we already have hundreds of leagues signed up to be making a big splash on National Voter Registration Day, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. We're also continuing to fight on many fronts for voting rights. We really have won many fights on voting rights, but threats remain. We've all heard, of course, that threats, particularly between now and Election Day, remain in the realm of potential last-minute purges of voter registration databases and other potential cuts to voting rights for voters and things that we need to be very vigilant on. Voter registration, of course, is the best antidote we have to those challenges. Helping people check their registration status, update it if needed, is the best way we can help voters overcome some of these challenges that may come up. And of course, it's our best opportunity to expand our electorate, bring new people in who have not yet had the chance to participate, and to also, of course, be out there and be visible in our community. We're perhaps best known for our voter registration work, and that's because we've been doing it so long and so well. And here are just some other ways to think about how we can grow these league registration programs to be even better. So, great league programs. I'm sure you could all tell me what you think a great league program does, but here are some things that we have heard from leagues, again, over the years. Great league programs look out. So great league programs are thinking about where are we going where we can reach the most people, where we can attract new people who have never heard of us, or better yet, have maybe never been asked if they want to register to vote before. So instead of just going to the same corner library we've always gone to, what are those new places we might be going into? And I know from speaking with many, many leagues across the country that you're very much thinking about this. Great league programs give our neighbors something that they want. So are we sure that we're offering voter registration when and where our neighbors are out there needing that information? Right before the registration deadline in your state, potentially. Again, in the neighborhoods where people are not being asked to register to vote, most likely. Great programs have some show and tell. That means we're taking pictures of what we're doing. We're telling the local media about what we're doing so that people, A, know that we're out there, are aware that voter registration deadlines are coming, so that they have an opportunity to maybe even volunteer with us if they want to get involved. And so that, again, our partners, our potential supporters and funders, potential new league members, all of those have a reason to know about what we're doing and see it. That helps get people talking about the fact that we're out there, coming back and partnering with us, coming back and asking how they can get involved. It's very, very important to promote and publicize the fact that we're out doing so much work this year. We know that the best programs also make people really happy to be working with us. So many volunteers, of course, report that voter registration is their very favorite thing to do. I know many of you are in the enviable position of having wait lists for your voter registration activities, and that's really, really exciting when we hear things like that. So work that makes us feel like we're being useful and productive helps energize us and makes it more likely that volunteers will sign up to do something else with the league. Good programs also require some resources and planning, and we'll give you some tips about how to go about doing that. What might you need some money for? How could you go about raising some money to make your voter registration activities even bigger and better? And then, of course, great programs reinforce our league's overall growth and forward momentum at all three levels. And by three levels, I mean national, state, and local. So in terms of the National League's voter registration priorities, you heard me mention several of these already. We've had a program, a pass-through grant program, supporting leagues for some time now in registering voters in high schools. The 38 leagues who participated in that program this year registered over 19,000 students at 400 to 500 high schools. We're also focusing on community colleges and naturalization ceremonies, as I mentioned. Leagues are out there doing work, again, at any of the locations where we know people are most likely to need our help and assistance with voter registration, or are most likely to have never been asked to register to vote. So when we think about where you're planning, and you probably already have some plans in place as to where you're going out to get registered, we want to also think about a couple other things here. I hope all of you have signed up for National Voter Registration Day. The latest count we got just about an hour ago was that we have 234 leagues signed up for National Voter Registration Day, and we really hope that you all will do that. Sign your league up as a partner, host an event on September 25th, and help keep the league the very biggest on-the-ground partner for that day for the probably the 7th time running, if we can do that this year. Many of you are also in your work experimenting with using state online voter registration tools to do your voter registration. So that's a whole new growth area for us as more and more states move online. We have some guidance about logistics to think through if you're going online for voter registration drives. And we also have a question for you in a few minutes here about what exactly you might be doing. We're encouraging everyone to collect information about the people that you register so that you can follow up with some Get Out the Vote. And we'll talk about Get Out the Vote in particular in a few minutes here. Now, to really dig into the demographics a little bit, groups like the League, what we would call independent voter registration groups, register millions of people in big election years. We know that the League in particular effectively turns out a high percentage of those people that we're registering, particularly on Vote 411. We know that our Vote 411, the turnout rate of people who register to vote on Vote 411 is particularly high among other groups that we would consider our peers or even competitors in this space. So that's really great news, and we want to keep building upon that. Groups like the League are especially critical in reaching underrepresented groups, or groups who don't traditionally register and vote at the same rates as other demographic groups. In particular, the League, unsurprisingly, is registering a lot of single women this year and in the last several years, as well as young voters and new citizens and some of the other groups I mentioned. We also know that the social interaction alone of asking someone to register to vote has a major positive effect, especially among some of the communities we're talking about. So just going into that high school or standing at that bus stop and asking someone to register to vote, helping them through that process, has a major positive effect and underscores just how important our work is. And we also, as independent voter registration groups, are providing the critical follow-up that voters need. So we are reaching out to voters, hopefully sending them a text, sending them a phone call or an email and saying, thank you for registering to vote with us. Election day is coming. Here's what you need to know. Here's where you can go to find your polling place. Here's where you can go to look at your local league's nonpartisan voter guide, etc. The groups like us are really critical to providing that Get Out the Vote, and we know that new voters especially need that communication in order to successfully make it to the polls. And underrepresented groups, going to places where large numbers of unregistered voters are, of course, make sure we're getting our biggest bang for our volunteer time and for our very limited resources. If we can go to a single place and register 100 people in a single day, or even more, as some of you are doing, that's a really great return on investment for our time, and a great way to focus our energies and to be, if you have to be, to choose strategically which opportunities to take advantage of as you're getting lots and lots of requests in this busy season. So to just look again, these are demographics that many of you are probably familiar with. This is based on 2016 census data. We can see here that the youngest age groups are registered and voting at significantly lower rates than older groups. And we can see that Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans in particular remain underrepresented in terms of voter registration and also, voter participation writ large. When to register folks to vote? I think, again, intuitively, most of you know this. Think September. Think deadline driven, just because most of us on the phone might be thinking about voting day in and day out, and voter registration is the thing we think about as we're falling asleep at night, doesn't mean that most voters are thinking about it, except right around election time. Our traffic for vote411.org is always highest the day before and the day of election day, even though, again, we all are thinking about it all year long. So really take advantage of those big deadlines that are coming. Make sure people know this is your last chance to participate in this election. Please register to vote. Think about going out at crowded times and really getting out there in the crowd and asking folks and helping people. Our DC League here in Washington in particular has been great about making sure volunteers have clipboards and that they can nimbly work through a crowd with voter registration forms. They've done that during a lot of the recent demonstrations and protests and so forth here in Washington, and have gotten a lot of folks registered because they're able to be sort of flexible and move where the crowds are. And then in another way, we also want to focus on movers, and in that sense, I mean people who have recently moved their residence. So we know that the data tells us that lots of people who move don't realize they need to re-register to vote in most places, or don't realize if they've moved from one state to another that voter registration may look very different in their new state of residence. So making sure we're focusing on people who have moved. So not just asking new people to register, but asking people who think they're registered, are you sure? Do you need to update your address or your name or any other information on your voter registration record so that they have a successful opportunity? So I think we have another poll Alicia's gonna have show up on your screen here. And we want to know, how is your league registering voters? So and I think this is a poll where you can select multiple choices. So are you going out in person in your community? Are you sharing the fact that Vote 411 has a great registration tool? Are you promoting what your state has? And or are you letting partners know about the importance of voter registration? Give people another minute or two.
Looks like most folks on the phone have responded. We have a lot of people. They're registering folks in person at different events. We don't have quite as many. We have about a third who are promoting Vote 411's registration tool, and we have 36% who are promoting their state voter registration tool, and then we have about 61% who are engaging with partners to help spread the word. So we have a lot of people doing this work in different ways.
That's great. That's wonderful. Thanks, Alicia. And so the engaging with partners piece, I'm thrilled to see that nearly 2/3 are already doing that. That's a great way, especially as time grows short, is an important way to reach many more people than you could reach alone in person, and clearly can be done with a little less work going into it as well. So that's how many of our partnerships at the national level look. We help write up the language that then our partners, such as the YMCA national headquarters, blasts out to their local partners nationwide, saying, here's this basic information. This is trusted, nonpartisan information from the League of Women Voters about how to get registered before the deadline. So that's a great thing that new volunteers can help you do, or folks who, for whatever reason are not able to make your in-person voter registration drives to help out. Maybe they can help tap into some networks, whether it be professional, volunteer, social networks, to be promoting your voter registration deadline, pointing people to Vote 411 or to, your website or whatever it is to encourage registration. We know that that's just really important, and we are a trusted voice, even if we're not physically meeting somebody with a clipboard at the bus stop. All right, so I'm going to move on here in the interest of time, and we're going to talk about some of the best practices for organizing a voter registration drive. Now, since many of you had experience doing this when we asked you, some of this will, of course, be things you're already doing. And if as I'm going, you have other really important tips that you think are great for people to know, do go ahead and put it in that question box for us, and we'll share it out to the group. So, of course, it's important to plan and set some goals. It can be really helpful to say, we would really like to have at least 20 voter registration drives this year. That may be laughably too much large goal for you, or laughably a small goal for you. So depending on the size of your league and how active you are in your community. But important to set some goals and hopefully achieve them. It's important to know the rules, and we'll have a slide about that in a minute, about just making sure that not only you, if you're organizing your voter registration drive, but any volunteer who's working on your voter registration drive, be really clear on any rules governing registration in your state. For that same reason, it's important to talk over with the team how things are going to run, even if it's just for 5 minutes at the beginning of the day before your team spreads out with clipboards or gets the table started for voter registration, making sure that people have a good understanding of how things are going to work. And then, as we touched upon earlier, really important to incorporate getting some visibility for the league and encouraging some league growth as you're out there doing this important work. So knowing the rules, obviously some of you live in states that have rules governing voter registration drives. Those rules differ from place to place, but your statewide elections official or your local board of elections are a great source of information for that. Many of them are providing trainings. In some states, you're even required to attend those trainings and so forth. Your state league can be very helpful if you have any questions about that, as can we here. We're always happy to be a resource for you on that, especially if you think you're being told something that's not quite right. So if you think your league is being told something that you need to abide by, something that you think doesn't sound quite right, feel free to reach out to us. We'd like to help you. And we, of course, want to advocate for the league and other voter registration groups to have full rights to be registering voters freely in our communities. That's really important to protect the rights of groups like ours, because they have come under threat in recent years, along with many other issues related to voters' rights. Our partners, the Fair Elections Legal Network, also have some great guides to voter registration rules, and we'll make sure to include a link to them when we send out some information after the webinar today, if you have questions, again, about rules governing how voter registration should work. When checking in with your elections officials locally, it's great to let them know what you have planned, attend, as I said, any trainings, clarify any questions you have about the process, anything that's changed since last year, see what kind of materials or stickers they might have available for you. And then when you're turning in completed voter registration applications, if you're doing them on paper, it's also helpful to flag any applications that are incomplete for any reason, pull it up to the top of the pile and say, hey, we realized this person didn't sign the form. We realized that this person missed a required field on the form. How can we help make this right? So make sure your election official knows that you're aware of that, and even offer to help in following up with that voter to make sure they make it onto the rolls. That's part of our, hopefully our responsibility and the way we can be most helpful in making sure people actually make it onto the rolls if they're registering to vote with us. Many of you are working with partners of all different kinds. Almost 2/3 of you said that you're working with partners specifically on voter registration. It's really helpful, especially in this crowded time, to think about where can we really make the most impact with partners. Are we prioritizing the partnerships that will bear the most fruit? And in this context, we're talking about the most new voters registered, who can really help us tap into new communities that we wouldn't otherwise reach. How can we specifically split up duties and be really clear ahead of time who's doing what, so that this partnership is fruitful and efficient and a good use of everybody's time. If you're like us, you know that you explore many partnership opportunities. Some of them become wonderful relationships, many of them don't. And so being really, giving a critical eye to partnerships and thinking strategically through where to focus your time can help cut down on the back and forth that might slow you down. And then one other important thing to think about, one thing we hear a lot from leagues is issues come up with, are we receiving appropriate credit for all that we're doing in our partnerships with other groups out there? Are we giving appropriate credit? Is that something we should hammer out ahead of time? Making sure that if we're putting out a press release about this wonderful voter registration campaign, that league logo is front and center, as well as whichever partner group we're working with. That's really important. Sometimes we do need to just come out and ask for that, or speak up if we think that's not happening. And of course, if someone says that to us, also being sensitive and meet our partners' needs as well when it comes to that. So that is something that comes up, and it's worth taking a moment to mention. Now, team planning. You all are probably in the throes of this, given that we're almost to mid-August here in our voter registration season. Hopefully, when I say who will do all these things, they're not all you, but I realize that in some places, this might be all you. So here's a little handy checklist for you. Who's going to acquire the materials you need? Who's going to get those voter registration forms, the pens, the stickers, the league banner, all those things that you'll need before you go out for voter registration? How are you going to stay organized in making sure that those materials make it from volunteer to volunteer and stay on track in what may be a very busy season for you? Who's recruiting the volunteers? And we have a few suggestions for you to do that coming up in a minute. Who's going to go meet with the elections officials? Who's the main point of contact with our partners? I recommend it being 1 or 2 people so that the communications lines are efficient and effective. Who's going to contact the venues or confirm times and dates and locations so that logistics are, again, hopefully as efficient as possible the day of your event? This is really important. Who's going to communicate with the media, promote the fact that the event is happening? Unfortunately, too often we hear that promotion of league voter service events is an afterthought. Or no one thinks to do it, or no one has time to do it ahead of time. And so we kind of forget to promote the fact that we're having a voter registration drive, and then guess what? Nobody comes. So really, really can't stress enough how important it is to promote the fact that you're going to be out there registering voters ahead of time if you want to have a good turnout. And asking your partners or your venue that you're going to be at to do the same thing, and let people know that you're going to be there when and how people can go about getting registered. And then, of course, who's going to be turning in those completed forms if you're doing paper forms, and who's going to be in charge of following up with voters after the event to get out the vote. Again, really important things to just be clear on ahead of time. Ways to organize your volunteer recruitment. Of course, some of you are just able to handle this with email lists and so forth. More and more leagues are getting more savvy and complex in how they manage especially voter registration volunteer through either Google groups, which are very easy and free to set up, using websites like meetup.com, Facebook groups, and other kinds of community signups. So we encourage you to explore those. And again, we're always happy to help suggest how you might do that more efficiently if you need something a little more effective than the good old email blast to get some volunteers recruited for your voter registration. And just as our technology we're using matters, so does our tone. Again, I hope that many of you are experiencing lots of interest in your voter registration, but remember to always be motivating and exciting and explicit when you're trying to shore up voters. Volunteers. My league here in Arlington, Virginia has gotten very good at this. They'll shoot out an email and say, we need 1 volunteer for Saturday morning at 10 a.m. We need 1 more person next Tuesday at 6. Go to the website where you can see all of the slots open for volunteering for voter registration this season. So being very specific about what we need. Here are some samples. We've been doing this for 35 years. we need to go to 10 ceremonies before November so we can register 500 people. We need your help. Here's where you can sign up for a shift. We're only asking an hour or two of you, etc. That's how we want to be. We want to be excited, specific, make it easy for people to sign up to volunteer. What we don't want is to say this. We don't want to say, well, our league's getting really small. We don't have enough volunteers. We have so much to do. This is such a bummer. I know everyone's really tired, but we really need your help, and we're going to be really disappointed, NAGI, if you let us down and don't show up to register voters. This kind of thing is not motivating. These are pulled from real life. These are tactics that we've seen, and they don't go very well. So just as we try to be excited and motivating when we're talking to voters and using positive reinforcement about how important their vote is and why their participation matters, that's how we need to talk to our potential volunteers as well. Having a little fun as league volunteers is allowed and encouraged. Having a little party after voter registration season wraps up is allowed and encouraged, and absolutely makes people much more likely to want to help out in the future. So just a little nudge in the right direction if you've seen some of that more negative tone come out during the height of the busy season. Now, as I said, we do recommend a quick team huddle before your voter registration. This is mostly to walk through their form, especially if you're moving to online for the first time in your league and not everybody is comfortable or has used the online registration form before. Walk through it, make sure you're talking about, so that every volunteer knows, what are the eligibility requirements? What fields must people absolutely fill out? If we're going out into a community where there are likely to be ineligible folks, and this will of course happen. You'll be in communities where there are undocumented Americans who are not going to fill out a voter registration form, or you're going to go into communities where people have been previously incarcerated, and that may, in your state, affect how they would go about reinstating their rights or getting registered to vote. It's important to know that, be aware of that, make sure your other volunteers are aware of that so that you're handling those situations with discretion, never putting anybody in a position where they feel uncomfortable, never publicly calling out someone if they don't want to register to vote or tell you that they can't for any reason. The best thing to do is just say, okay, or offer to help, offer to follow up with some information about getting the rights reinstated and so forth if that's an issue. And of course, this just as we want to be positive and motivating when talking to our own volunteers, we need to be positive and enthusiastic and practice what we're going to say to voters. It really does help to practice with a buddy, or I know I myself practice in the mirror before I'm going to go out and register voters, just to make sure I'm clear, that I'm fresh and ready to go. Talk about why voting matters. Talk about what's going on in your community that really is at stake this election year. Your folks in your community are voting on local offices, statewide offices, and congressional federal office. And all those people are making decisions on things that really matter and that members of your community are dealing with every single day. So helping connect those dots, helping know what common questions tend to come up about how voter registration works in your area, and being ready to answer those questions succinctly and successfully for people can really help new volunteers especially feel comfortable. All right, so at the event, and this is where I would love some additional tips if you have them, if you want to type them into that question panel and tell us what else are you doing that really works well at your voter registration events. I can't stress enough how important it is to walk the room and smile. Again, this is pulled from real life. I've attended league voter registration events where a few people are sitting behind a table, talking amongst themselves, not making eye contact with anybody in the crowd, and then wondering why nobody came up to register to vote. That's really not going to work. So this is again a gentle reminder to get out from behind that table, be positive, be friendly. If someone says they're not interested, of course, let it go and move on to the next person. But asking people, hey, have you moved since the last election? Do you need help registering to vote? Do you know somebody in your group who might want to register? Always bring extra volunteers, at least one more person than you think you might need. It often comes in handy. And again, in this new day and age where we finally in many states have online voter registration, think through how you might utilize technology to streamline your voter registration, but be aware of logistics. Simple things like, will there be a solid Wi-Fi signal? And do our volunteers know how to use the state online voter registration system? Can make or break whether that's a really good solution for you. And again, we have a training resource on that that we'll share out after the webinar today, if that's something you're thinking about. Now we're going to talk a little bit about following up with people that we've registered. We talked about the importance of get out the vote and why that's important. To run through it, the research tells us that voters need follow-up. It's simply not enough to just register someone and collect their form. We really do need to follow up and give them election-related information, such as, here's our voter's guide, here's when election day is. If you need to apply for an absentee ballot because you're a student, here's where you can go for that information. These are the basic kinds of things that, that voters really are looking for. And we hear from lots of leagues that many, many voters do sign up and want to get that information from us because they trust us as the people registering them in the first place. Having records about what we're doing and who we're registering also helps us troubleshoot with elections officials. Again, using the example of if someone's form comes back and is not complete, we may have that person's cell phone number or email address that they've given us that we can then follow up and say, hey, please contact the elections office to finish your process. It helps protect us as an organization should there be any situation where it'd be important to go back and know who we registered and when. It potentially gives people an avenue to get involved in our work by collecting their information, getting them to sign up for our email address, email list, and so forth. And frankly, it's the best practice among partners and anybody who funds voter registration work, who in turn helps fund the pass-through grant programs that we are able to run here out of the national office. It's absolutely just the expectation that you're doing simple get out the vote for the people that you register in this day and age. One thing that many leagues use is a simple sign-in sheet at their tables or something like this, which is a pledge card. You would cut this and have it be, a simple quarter sheet or half sheet of paper asking folks to put their name and their contact information. You can, clip that to a voter registration form and just ask them to fill it out in most places, or have them on your voter registration table, or if you're in a school, pass them out on the desks, whatever the case is, to get people to sort of opt into your email list and so forth. And there's a sample of that in one of the training resources that we'll share out after this. So I hope folks are doing some get out the vote. And now I think Jess is going to launch a new poll about what are you doing with get out the vote, if anything.
I can't unmute myself.
You are unmuted, Jess.
Oh, okay, great. So as people are still responding, most of us are saying we don't really do GOTV so far. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds here to let people respond.
Yep, I think most people who are going to respond have done so now. Yeah, so it looks like 2/3 of you say you don't really do this, and about 1/3 are doing some or always doing it. So this is, that's sort of what I expected. This is an area of growth for us as an organization. And again, that's one of the reasons why you heard us talking about it a lot at convention and talking about it in this training and so forth, because it is important for us to continue to do this and be comfortable with it. And we have some helpful scripts that we'll be sharing out for what you would actually say, and it's all based on sort of what the research tells us is effective. And we hope that you'll be able to utilize it or at least start thinking about it, even if it's not for this year, but for next year. Thanks, Jess. So a couple more. We're getting towards the end, and we will have some time for questions. We've talked a lot about media and the importance of public promotion. If you're communicating with reporters, even a few local bloggers or local newspaper or TV station about your voter registration activities, it's important to keep it simple and brief and focus on the impact. So how many people were registered? What do other voters need to know about the upcoming election? If you have pictures or can provide photo opportunities for the media, of course, that's really exciting and important as well. And we have some template media resources. You'll be seeing a lot of those in the upcoming weeks in the league update that goes out to league leaders to help you do this easily, help you just kind of insert your local information and quickly be able to send out things to the local media. So on that note, Jess is going to launch another poll here. We want to know, how are you going to be telling your community about what you're doing this season with voter registration? Okay, I'll ask everyone to vote if you haven't already voted. And I think this is another one where you can select multiple options.
Yeah, so Maggie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So it looks like the majority of people are doing social media work and asking partners to spread the word. Press releases are a little bit less than that, but it looks like the distribution of how people are talking about their voter registration work is fairly evenly divided among these options. Interested in knowing what the other category is, feel free to share in the questions box.
Yeah, please do tell us if you're one of those 14% doing something else. Maybe you're doing something amazing that other folks haven't even thought of yet. And on social media, we will have in the league update in the upcoming weeks some sample social media posts around voter registration, National Voter Registration Day, get out the vote, and so forth, again, in the hopes that you can just copy it, make it your own, and easily have access to some good images and so forth that our team is putting together for you. So a very quick word on fundraising. We mentioned at the very beginning that some of this work does take some money, whether it's that you really need that new banner or some register to vote posters, or you need some resources to fund other things to make this work effective. Technology, actually reimburse your volunteers for their mileage and parking fees. Imagine that. These things can, do cost some money, and it's okay to ask. And in fact, we encourage you to ask. We encourage you to apply for our grants when we make those available. Those are always listed in the league update when we're doing a new round of voter registration grants. We encourage you to ask. Individuals are our best donors, whether it's a league member or somebody who works with a partner organization, somebody who you've done good work for. Maybe it's that condo association where you've done voter registration for the last several years running. Maybe they can make a donation to your league to kind of continue to support that important work. When you're asking for money, it can be uncomfortable the first time many of us do it. It really helps me to be specific about what their support will do. So I'm not asking for money for me, Maggie Bush. I'm asking for money for me, the League of Women Voters, the hundreds of league volunteers who I know are out there pounding the pavement, registering voters every year. And I know that a $20,000 contribution will enable us to support X number of voter registration drives carrying out in your local community. Maybe you know that $500 will allow you to get all new signs for all of your voter registration, or print 1,000 new handouts with your Vote 411 Voters Guide information on it to give out to voters at the upcoming state fair. So being really specific about what their support can do for voters in your community is a way to A, become more comfortable asking, and B, really hammer home to that potential supporter just what they can do if they open up their checkbook to you. So we have some other resources to help folks to help leagues raise money for their critical work, and are always happy to help talk through that, and encourage you to be asking for money and asking for more and more of it as our work gets bigger and bigger. So we're really just sort of at the end here. We've talked a lot about Vote 411. Hope you check that out. The league website in particular, if you go to the league website and go to the league management area, there are lots of toolkits that are specific to voter registration. And then, of course, we hope everyone is signing up as a partner for National Voter Registration Day. And all of these things will be included in the email that we send out after this webinar, including the recording of today's session. So for that, we're going to put up these kind of top goals here, and then we have a few minutes to open it up for questions. So I hope everyone can let us know if they have a question. Next to your name, you can raise your hand, and we'll call on you. And then I know, Jess and Alicia, if other questions have come up that you think we should take, or things you want to mention from the question panes, we'd be happy to do that. And yes, I'm sorry, everyone. We did hear that the poll was still up on the screen, and we've taken it down now. Sorry about that. Just a little technical glitch. Let's see. I don't see anyone raising their hand for a question.
Hey, Maggie, we do have some people asking questions in the question box.
Great.
Susan Senko asks, when you say we should collect contact information when people register, does that mean we take information from the registration form, or do we ask them to fill something else out?
Great question. Thanks. It really depends. So in most states, there's absolutely no restriction on taking information directly from the forms, as long as it's not private information. So for example, you would never need somebody's social security information in order to follow up for Get Out the Vote. So we always, of course, check any state guidelines. We are happy to help, be a resource for you to find out if there are any rules in your state that you need to be aware of. But then we always encourage you to only collect the information you think you're going to use. And you can, if you're doing it that way, you can only follow up with basic election-related information. So it would not be appropriate, for example, to pull information from voter registration forms and then solicit those people for donations directly. What many leagues do, as they're getting more comfortable doing this, though, is do the other thing you suggested, which is have a sign-up sheet, have that pledge card sitting there. That is also helpful in places where phone number or email address is not on your voter registration form, which in most states it is not. So if what you really have the capability to do is to just do email blasts out to new voters, then by all means have an email sign-up sheet, and that's going to be at least your best bet of being able to follow up and communicate with voters. So our high school voter registration training manual has a lot of great information about how to go about doing that, and not just for high school students, but sort of in general for new voters. And that'll be in the email that we send out. Great question. Let's see, I see a hand raised. I'm going to go ahead. Let's see. Norman, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, this is Norman, or John, actually. I'm with Collier County, Florida, League of Women Voters. And I've done just a few registration events, and I got hooked into being in charge of the National Voter Registration Day responsibility, a little overwhelmed. So I'm kind of going in directions. Either my first thought was to get a venue and do things that would, in a target neighborhood, and do things that would attract people to come to that venue. But now I'm kind of, from talking to people, it seems like a better approach is a more dispersed approach. So if the first one is kind of centralized, the second one would be dispersed. Try and get some volunteers to go out door to door, maybe just lots of promotion, go to high schools. Any sense of which approach, if I could boil it down to those two approaches, you find would be more effective?
Sure, that's great. I mean, I think what we hear often works well is a hybrid of those sorts of things. So maybe there's a table set up in a central location, like a community center or a town square or something. But then also some volunteers are out with clipboards walking around. Door-to-door registration is not something that the league typically has done as an organization. So if you do go that route, I'd love to hear how it goes, of course. But that's very resource heavy and not something that the league has always really done. But definitely think big crowded places where there are lots of people who would either be brand new to registering or re-registering. We do know that at schools we register lots of people in one fell swoop, just because there's lots of newly eligible people to register. So
okay, sorry, not going to the trouble of getting a venue and everything, renting that, but rather just a high traffic
probably
location,
not.
Well publicized,
Yeah,
with a bunch of people and some other activities around that, something like that.
Yeah, that would absolutely be our recommendation based on what we've heard goes really well. And congratulations on your promotion to voter registration lead there in Collier County. And I hope it goes well. I'm sure it will.
Thanks very much.
Sure. Let's see. I'm going to look through I'm not seeing anyone else raising their hand, but I'm going to see.
We do have a question in the question box. Oh, sorry. Hi. We have a couple questions in the question box about asking for clarifications on examples of partners. And, we are a nonpartisan group. So Maggie, could you speak to successful partnership?
Yes, of course. So yes. So first of all, Gail, I do see your point. Please emphasize that we don't partner with partisan groups, right? So we don't partner with political parties, or in terms of voter registration, would tend to say not to partner with groups who are directly endorsing candidates. That can cause some confusion about what the league is, which is, of course, a nonpartisan organization. That said, if a partisan organization wants to share Vote 411 as a helpful resource, of course that's okay. We want anybody and everybody to utilize the resources that we have available. Examples of other partners, I'm seeing Trish's question there. Many leagues partner with the local NAACP. Many leagues partner up with local school groups, student groups. Students clearly are leading the way in a lot of our communities right now in terms of civic engagement, and it's wonderful to partner with them and do really have a peer-to-peer engagement with young people, if that's who you're trying to register. Many leagues partner with all kinds of other groups. We right now are involved in several different national level partnerships that we'll soon be making available to leagues in selected local areas around affordable housing communities. So actually setting up voter registration within properties that are mixed income or affordable housing designated, to make sure that residents have the opportunity to register and vote. I know in urban areas, lots of leagues are going and partnering up with apartment complexes, condo buildings, and so forth to do registration. Again, places that are full of people who are likely frequent movers, and hitting people where they are. So those are just a few examples. The YMCA is somebody I mentioned. That's any sort of community service organization, community health centers, Planned Parenthood, those kinds of groups where where there's a lot of local folks and in those likely unregistered to vote categories who are attending either physically or can be reached through their networks, are all great ideas when it comes to partnering. So I think maybe, Alicia and Jess, are there any other top questions you think I should hit? Some folks are telling us in their various states what's okay to collect in terms of contact information or not. And yep, it really absolutely does change by state. So that's, again, important to check. So I'm glad. Thanks, Joan, for bringing that point up. Someone asks, is ACLU okay as a partner? Yep. Again, I would, just be aware of perceptions, be aware of what work they're doing, and be aware of where you're comfortable. And it may be that they're a great partner on some things, but not on all things. So that's, I hope, not a non-answer for you. But in general with groups, some of this really depends on your local community and what you're comfortable with. But as long as the league is not doing anything that's partisan and is just simply providing voter registration opportunities for anybody who would ask, that's usually the guiding principle. All right. Well, we will go through the rest of these questions here and see what else we can provide in the email to go out to everybody. And I really appreciate everyone's time. I know we're just about at the end of our hour, so we'll wrap it up there. And thank you, everyone, for your time. Thanks for attending, and congratulations on such incredible voter registration work already this season. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.